I never thought the hands I once held in the delivery room, those tiny fingers curled around my thumb, would one day shove me hard enough into the kitchen counter that I cracked 2 ribs. But that's exactly what my son did. On a Tuesday evening in March, in the house I'd owned for 31 years, in the kitchen where I'd cooked every birthday dinner he'd ever had. And the worst part, he didn't even look sorry. My name is not important. What I am is a 64-year-old retired pipefitter from Hamilton, Ontario. I worked for CN Rail for 11 years before moving over to a private contractor that did industrial work across southern Ontario. I know what it means to earn something. I know what it means to come home so tired your hands shake when you try to turn the key in the front door. My wife Sandra understood that. She worked too. 30 years as a medical office administrator at a clinic on Upper James. We were not rich people. We were people who showed up. Sandra passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She fought it for 14 months, and she fought it like she did everything, quietly, without complaint, with a kind of dignity I still don't fully understand. When she died, I was left with a paid-off house, a modest RRSP, a CPP payment that comes the 3rd week of every month, and a son I thought I knew. His name is Evan. He's 33 years old. He works in logistics coordination for a shipping company in Mississauga. He makes decent money. Nothing extravagant, but decent. He's been with his girlfriend Renata for 4 years. She's not a bad person at her core, I don't think, but she has a way of wanting things that makes wanting them feel like an emergency. When they announced they were getting married last fall, I was genuinely happy. I took them both to dinner at a place on King Street. I ordered a bottle of wine. I gave Evan a hug and I told him his mother would have been so proud. He teared up a little. Renata smiled and showed me the ring, which was beautiful. It was a good night. I didn't know that dinner was the last truly good night we'd have together for a long time. It started about 3 weeks later. Evan called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked if we could talk. I said, of course, come over. He showed up alone. Renata wasn't with him, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee. He seemed nervous. He kept turning his mug in circles. I asked him what was going on. He said they'd been looking at venues. He said the ones they liked weren't cheap. He said Renata had always imagined a certain kind of wedding, and that she had a very specific vision for what she wanted, and that this was, after all, a once-in-a-lifetime event. I nodded along. I understood all of that. Then he told me the number. $45,000. I put my coffee down. I asked him to say that again because I genuinely thought I'd misheard. He repeated it. 45,000. He said that's what a proper wedding costs in this market. He said venues in the Hamilton and Burlington area were booking at 15 to 20,000 alone. He said catering was another 12. Photography, flowers, the dress, the rehearsal dinner. It adds up fast, he told me, as though I'd never encountered arithmetic before. I sat with that number for a moment. I want to be clear, I didn't say no immediately. I tried to be a father first and a financial person second. I asked him how much he and Renata had saved toward it themselves. He looked at the table. I asked again. He said they had about $4,000 set aside, but that they'd been dealing with some credit card debt they were trying to clear, and that the rental market in Mississauga had been brutal, and that it just hadn't been possible to save more. I thought about Sandra's ring. I thought about the years I worked 60-hour weeks so that we could pay off this house. I thought about my RRSP, which I'd been careful not to touch, because at 64 you do not know exactly how long that money needs to last. I thought about my own father, who came to Canada from Portugal with a bag and a trade skill, and never once asked anyone to fund his life. I told Evan I loved him. I told him I wanted this wedding to be wonderful. And then I told him I couldn't give him $45,000. He didn't react right away. He just nodded slowly like he was processing. He asked what I could contribute. I told him I'd been thinking about $5,000. I could give $5,000 comfortably without putting my own stability at risk. He stared at me. $5,000, he said, out of 45. I said yes. And I said that the rest was something he and Renata would need to figure out together, maybe consider scaling the event down, Maybe look at a smaller venue, maybe. He cut me off. He said scaling down wasn't an option. He said Renata's family was coming from out of province and that they had expectations. He said her parents were contributing $20,000 from their end and that it would look terrible if my contribution didn't at least come close to matching theirs. I told him I was not in a competition with Renata's parents about who could spend more money on a single day. He pushed back from the table. His voice went up. He said I was being selfish. He said I had a house that was paid off, that I had my pension, that I had Sandra's life insurance payout sitting in an account doing nothing, and that the least I could do for my only son's wedding was act like it mattered to me. That last part landed differently than he intended it to. I felt something go cold in my chest. I told him very quietly that nothing about his wedding not mattering to me. What didn't matter to me was $45,000 worth of flowers and table settings. There's a difference, I said. He left. He didn't slam the door. He just left. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we both cool down and come back to the table like adults. 2 weeks went by. Then Renata called me. I should have known then. Renata is not someone who picks up the phone unless there's a specific purpose. She was pleasant at first. She asked about my health. She asked about the house. Then she moved into it sideways. She said she knew things had been tense with Evan, that she understood these conversations were difficult, that she just wanted to make sure I'd had time to really think it through. She used the phrase, "your legacy as a father," twice in the same call. She said she knew how much Sandra would have wanted this day to be perfect. I told her Sandra would have wanted the two of them to live within their means. There was a pause. Then she said that she'd spoken to her brother Daniel, who works at a financial planning firm in Toronto, and that he'd suggested there were options I might not be aware of, that I could draw from my RRSP, that property values in Hamilton had increased significantly, that a home equity line of credit was something many people use for exactly this kind of thing. I want you to understand what had just happened. My son's fiancée had asked her brother to look into my financial situation and then called me to suggest I take out a loan against my house to pay for their wedding. I ended the call. The following Saturday, both of them showed up. I hadn't invited them. I heard the car in the driveway, and when I opened the front door, they were already coming up the walk. Evan had a look on his face I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly. Something harder than anger. Renata stayed slightly behind him, arms crossed. I let them in because he was my son. We went to the kitchen. Nobody sat down. Evan started talking, and his voice had none of the uncertainty from our first conversation. He said he'd done the math. He said he knew I had more than I was letting on. He said Sandra's life insurance payout was over $100,000, and that sitting on it while your own son scraped by was, and I'm quoting him now, embarrassing. I asked him how he knew about the insurance payout. He didn't answer right away. Renata looked at the floor. I looked at her, and I asked again, and she said Daniel had some contacts, that it wasn't a big deal, that information like that wasn't exactly secret. Her brother had gone looking into my private financial affairs, had made calls, had found out what he shouldn't have known. Something shifted in the room. I told them both they needed to leave, that this conversation was over, that I was not going to be pressured in my own home about money that belonged to me and no one else. Evan stepped toward me. I held my ground because I'm 64 years old and I'm not easily moved, and I did not expect what happened next. He shoved me, both hands flat on my chest, hard. I went back into the counter behind me. The edge caught my lower ribs and the pain was immediate and bright. I grabbed the counter to keep from going down. He was shaking. His face had gone a color I don't have a word for. He said I was a selfish old man. He said I had never really supported him, not really, not the way other fathers did. He said I'd always held money over him like a weapon, and that his mother had always made excuses for me, and that now that she was gone, he could finally say what he actually thought. Renata was standing in the kitchen doorway. She was not trying to stop him. She was not saying anything. I looked at my son. I looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to find a person you recognize and you can't. I told him to get out of my house. He left. Renata followed him without a word. I heard the car start. I stood in my kitchen alone, holding my ribs, and I thought about the day he was born. I thought about teaching him to skate at the rink on Barton Street. I thought about sitting in the hospital waiting room during his appendix surgery when he was 9, the longest 3 hours of my life. I thought about the father I had tried to be. My neighbor Margaret, who's 71 and lives next door and has known our family for 20 years, had seen the car pull up and was going to bring over a pie she'd just made. She knocked on the back door shortly after they left. She took one look at me and asked what had happened. I told her. She sat with me while I called my doctor's after-hours line. The ribs, 2 of them it turned out, were cracked, not fully broken, but enough to make the next 6 weeks uncomfortable. What Evan didn't know was that I'd had a security camera installed on the front porch 18 months ago, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. The doorbell camera covers the porch, but the angle catches the front of the house, including the kitchen window. It also, and this matters, had a second unit inside the front hallway that I'd added to monitor the main floor when I went to visit my brother in Sudbury last summer. I never mentioned it to anyone. There was no reason to. Everything that happened in my kitchen that Saturday was recorded. I didn't call the police that night. I want to be honest about that. I sat with the recording, with my cracked ribs, with the silence of a house that used to have more people in it, and I was not sure what I wanted to do. Part of me, the part that had held his tiny hand in a delivery room, wanted to believe this was a breakdown, an aberration, something that could be talked through. I gave it a week. He didn't call. He didn't come back. He sent me one text that said he was sorry for how things had gotten heated, which is not the same as an apology, and we both knew it. I called a lawyer. Her name is Sylvie. She's been practicing in Hamilton for 20 years, family and civil disputes. I showed her the video. She watched it twice. She told me I had a straightforward assault case. She also noted something I hadn't fully considered, that Renata's brother, in accessing my financial information and using it to pressure me, had potentially violated federal privacy laws. In Canada, accessing someone's personal financial information without consent and using it to coerce them is not a gray area. I filed a police report. The officer who took my statement was professional and direct. He told me the video was compelling and that they'd be in touch. Evan called me 2 days later. His voice was different. The hardness was gone, and what replaced it was something I recognized: fear. He asked if I'd really called the police. I said I had. He said we needed to talk, that this had all gotten out of hand, that he'd never meant to hurt me. I told him I knew that. I also told him that meant and did were 2 separate things, and that cracked ribs don't heal based on intentions. He came over alone that time. Renata didn't come, which I noticed. He sat at the kitchen table where this had all started, and he looked like a man who'd realized something important about himself and didn't like what he'd found. I let him talk. He apologized, a real one this time. He cried. I watched my son cry, and I felt something complicated that I still don't have a clean name for: grief and love and fury all folded together. I told him I accepted the apology because I didn't want to carry the weight of not accepting it. But I also told him that accepting it was not the same as pretending it hadn't happened. Some things, once done, leave a mark that doesn't fade. He understood that, or I believe he understood it. The police matter proceeded. The Crown ultimately offered a diversion program, given it was a first offense, given the family context, given that Evan completed an anger management program through St. Joseph's Healthcare and wrote a formal statement of accountability. It wasn't a criminal conviction. Some people will say that's not enough. I've thought about that. What I know is that the process itself, the report, the video, the formal accountability, changed something in him that a family conversation never would have. Daniel, Renata's brother, was a separate matter. His employer was notified of the circumstances by the police and by a formal letter from Sylvie. I was told he no longer works at that firm. I don't know where he is now, and I've chosen not to spend energy finding out. Renata and I have not spoken. Whether the wedding happens, whether it happened the way they planned, I genuinely do not know. Evan and I are in contact, slowly, carefully, the way you'd walk on ice you weren't fully sure could hold your weight. We have had coffee twice, Both times I drove home afterward and sat in my driveway for a while before going inside. There is a particular kind of silence that lives in a house after you've raised a child in it and that child is gone one way or another. I know that silence well. I've been living in it since Sandra died. What I learned, what this whole thing taught me, at the cost of 2 cracked ribs and a year that aged me considerably, is that being a father doesn't mean funding every version of the life your child imagines for himself. It means showing up. It means working the double shifts. It means being there in the hospital waiting room. It means holding your ground when the ground needs to be held, even when the person pushing you is someone you love. I still have Sandra's ring. I never sold it. I never would. It's in the small wooden box on my dresser, right where it has been since the day she died. Sometimes in the morning I open the box just to see it there. She would have known what to do about all of this. She always did. I'm not sure I ever will. But I'm still here, and for now, that's enough. I've been sitting with this for a long time now. Not the cracked ribs, those healed, more or less, by early May. What I've been sitting with is the question of how we get here. How a boy you carried on your shoulders at the CNE, who fell asleep on your chest during hockey playoffs, ends up standing in your kitchen with his hands flat on your sternum and a look in his eyes you don't recognize. I don't think it happened overnight. That's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. It builds slowly, the way rust does, not visible until the damage is already done underneath. Every time Evan wanted something and got it without having to wait, without having to work, without having to sit with the discomfort of not having it yet, something small was lost. Not his fault entirely, not mine entirely either. But the ledger exists whether we acknowledge it or not. What I know now, at 64, having lived through more than I ever expected to have to live through, is that integrity isn't something you declare. It's something you demonstrate, over and over, in the small moments nobody's watching. Sandra knew that. She showed it every day she went to that clinic. Every year she filed our taxes on time. Every conversation she had where she said the true thing instead of the easy thing. She didn't lecture about it. She just did it. And I understood, watching her, that a person of real character doesn't need the circumstances to be favorable. They hold the line when it costs them something. That's what I tried to do when Evan asked me for $45,000. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. There's a version of love that says yes to everything, that smooths every road, that protects a child from every consequence. And I've watched that version of love produce adults who fall apart the moment life doesn't cooperate. Real love, the kind Sandra and I tried to practice, sometimes sounds like no. Sometimes it looks like a boundary held quietly in a kitchen in Hamilton, while someone you raised is shouting at you. Renata's brother Daniel thought he was being clever. He had access to information and he used it as leverage, and it cost him his career. That's not punishment handed down by anyone in particular. It's just the way things work. When you build your strategy on a foundation of dishonesty, the structure doesn't hold. It never does. He made a calculated move, and it collapsed on him, not because the universe is fair, but because deception requires more maintenance than most people can sustain. Evan is trying. I believe that. The 2 coffees we've had were awkward and careful and real in a way that our easier years, looking back, sometimes weren't. There's something clarifying about a moment of crisis. It strips away the performance and leaves you with whatever's actually there. What I found, underneath everything, was that he is still my son, damaged in some ways I probably contributed to, capable of better, still in there. I'm not a man who gives speeches. I never have been. But if I were to say one thing to anyone watching this who is somewhere in the middle of something similar, it would be this. Hold yourself to a standard that has nothing to do with what the other person is doing. Do the right thing because it reflects who you are, not because it guarantees a particular outcome. Stay standing when you're pushed. Call the lawyer when you need to. Ask for help from your neighbor when your ribs hurt. And you don't want to sit alone. Sandra's ring is still in the box on my dresser. I still open it some mornings. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for when I do. Maybe just the reminder that some things were real and that real things last.